Good afternoon. Fear can be something that's really hard for us. We have a fear of death, or really, I think it's a fear of the unknown. Since we don't know what's after that, or we've not experienced it, we're afraid. And a lot of it has to do with fear of the unknown. When I was younger, I had all the lights in the house on all the time because I didn't know what was outside, or if something had come outside or something was outside I didn't know about. Anyway, fear is just a hard thing. It really is. And in times like these, we can tend to be fearful because we don't know what's going to happen. We're not given a lot of information by those in authority over us and in our government system. And so sometimes it's just a scary thing. But Jesus admonishes his disciples. He says, do not be afraid. Our next text is in John chapter 6, and Jesus had crossed the Sea of Galilee from Capernaum. He crossed it and went south, and that's where he had met this large crowd that was following him, and he had broken loaves and fish and fed more than 5,000 people. We discussed that last week, or the last devotional. And then Jesus is going to head back across the Sea of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, back to Capernaum. But the Sea of Galilee is a very interesting little body of water. It's about 13 miles long and it's about 8 miles wide. It's about 680 feet below sea level, and it's surrounded by hills, especially on the east side where the hills reach about 2,000 feet. It's small, and so the winds come through those hills or over those hills, and they drop down into the sea there. They just whip and they get really violent when the hot air meets the cold air, because down on the sea itself it's warm and tropical, but up where the hills are, it's cold. And so when this cold air meets this warm air, violent storms can occur. As a matter of fact, the Sea of Galilee is known for its violent storms. You might think it's just like Lake Erie here in the United States. Even though Lake Erie is immensely larger than the Sea of Galilee, it's still only about 200 feet deep. And so when the winds come across Lake Erie, it whips up pretty quickly into a storm. The same thing in the Sea of Galilee. It was known for its storms. Now Jesus is going back to Capernaum. So let's pick up here in John 6, starting in 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. Now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. I really can't imagine what's going through the minds of the apostles. I would think that they would have waited on the sea for Jesus, or at the port for Jesus to get into the boat, but they didn't. They started rowing away, and they were waiting for Jesus to come to them. Did they expect him to come by another boat? Did they expect him to walk out there? Either way, they'd gone about 3 or 4 miles. Now remember, the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long. They're going from the south side of the sea back to the north side where Capernaum is. So they've only gone about 3 or 4 miles. And this storm picks up. The winds come whipping down over the hills, and the hot air meets the cool air, and it begins this storm. Now remember, a lot of these apostles are seasoned fishermen, so they understand the weather patterns on the Sea of Galilee. I don't know that they were too afraid of this particular storm. Some of the other accounts are not accounts of this particular thing that happened, but some of the other gospels say that there were some storms on the sea that these fishermen were very afraid of. But either way, they were frightened, but they weren't frightened because of the storm. They were frightened when they saw Jesus walking out on the water to them. And then Jesus says to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." We have to stop here because I need to take you back to Moses. I need to take you back to Moses when he meets God at the burning bush. And as he meets God at the burning bush, God gives him a task. He says, "I want you to deliver my people from Egypt." As a matter of fact, in Exodus 3 and verse 10, "Come, I'll send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So that's Moses' task. But he's not too keen on the idea, and he starts to give some excuses. He says, who am I that you're going to send me? And of course, God answered that. He says, who shall I say sent me? We're going to come back to that one. He says, they won't believe me, so he gives some signs. He says, I can't speak well. And then finally, he says, please send somebody else. So Moses isn't too keen on doing this. But when he asks God, he says, who shall I say sent me? God answers him. God answers him with the to be verb. He says, tell them I am has sent you. And so those two words, whether they're in Hebrew or Greek, are extremely important words to the Israelites. I am. As a matter of fact, when Jesus is talking to the Israelites in John chapter 8, he says, before Abraham was, I am. And I'm sure that phrase, of course, it's not grammatically correct because it's two different tenses. It's the past tense and the present tense. Before Abraham was, I am. So he's specifically calling this phrase into their minds, and he is equating himself with the great I am that spoke to Moses. Sometimes we have, I don't want to call them translation errors, but some of the translators put on a word that's not in the Greek, like I am he. The he is understood, and so they just add that word. When Jesus is in the garden and he's about to be arrested, they come up to him and say, we're looking for Jesus. And in our text in the Bible, Jesus says, I am he. But in the Greek, it only says, I am. And if you read the accounts, when he says, I am, power came out of him and everybody fell down backwards. So I am is extremely important. Now, when Jesus meets the apostles on the Sea of Galilee, he says, it is I. Those are the same exact two words as I am. Now they're in reverse order, but they're the same two words. So as Jesus walks up to the boat and sees his apostles frightened and scared, he says, I am. Don't be afraid. I am here. I am here to provide salvation for all mankind. Don't be afraid about the weather patterns on the Sea of Galilee. Don't be afraid that you see somebody walking on water. I am. Don't be afraid, especially today when so many things are up in the air. We just don't know how this is all going to play out. Is when will the virus go away? When, of course, it won't go away. When will things get back to normal? Will they ever get back to normal? I saw a great article on what is normal, and we don't want things to go back to normal. And it was a very good article. So Jesus says, don't be afraid because he is the great I am. You know, we serve a God who is the creator. He's the creator of all things. We serve a God who is both Lord and Master. So if there's one thing that you need to take from this particular miracle that Jesus does in the book of John, Jesus' words, it is I. Do not be afraid. May the Lord bless you and keep you.